The starship horizon hung in the vast emptiness of space like a gleaming metal wasp, its unexpected design catching the light of a distant binary star system. Captain Jack Thompson drummed his fingers against the command console, a half-empty coffee mug precariously balanced nearby, its contents long since gone cold and forgotten. Incoming transmission. Lieutenant Rebecca Martinez called out, her voice tinged with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The Concordance vessel is hailing us. Again. Jack grinned, a mischievous spark dancing in his eyes. This would be their third attempt at communication, and the previous two encounters had been anything but standard diplomatic procedure. He toggled the communication channel, deliberately adjusting his posture to look both completely relaxed and slightly off-kilter. "Greetings, esteemed representatives of the Galactic Concordance," he began, deliberately speaking in a tone that mixed formal diplomatic language with an undercurrent of casual irreverence. "I hope this transmission finds you intriguing." A holographic display flickered to life, revealing Ambassador Zornak, a crystalline being whose translucent body shifted with complex geometric patterns that supposedly represented emotional states. Right now, those patterns suggested complete bewilderment. "Captain Thompson," Zornak began, their voice a melodic series of clicks and harmonics translated by the ship's communication systems, "we find ourselves perplexed by your previous communication attempts." Jack leaned back, grabbing his cold coffee and taking an exaggerated sip. "Perplexed. I prefer to think of it as innovative diplomatic engagement. The previous interactions had been anything but traditional." During the first communication, Jack had responded to the Concordance's formal greeting with an impromptu magic trick, producing a rubber chicken from seemingly nowhere and performing a brief comedy routine about interstellar travel. The alien delegation had spent 3 standard galactic hours analyzing the potential diplomatic significance of the rubber chicken. The second attempt had been even more confusing. Instead of a standard cultural exchange, Jack had initiated a complex game of charades, using nothing but interpretive dance and elaborate hand gestures to communicate humanity's peaceful intentions. The Concordance representatives had deployed their most advanced sino-linguistic algorithms, which had ultimately crashed under the weight of human unpredictability. Zornak's crystalline form pulsed with colors that the ship's computer could only approximate as confusion, frustration, and a bizarre hint of fascination. "Your communication protocols," the ambassador began, then paused, clearly struggling to find appropriate words, "do not conform to any known diplomatic framework in the recorded history of the Galactic Concordance." Jack's grin widened. "Exactly." Lieutenant Martinez leaned over, whispering, "Sir, are you trying to break their communication algorithms?" "Breaking them," Jack chuckled. "I'm reimagining them." The truth was both simple and complex. Humanity had spent centuries developing communication strategies that emphasized adaptability, emotional intelligence, and the ability to convey complex ideas through multiple simultaneous channels. Where other species saw communication as a precise, linear process, humans understood it as a fluid, multidimensional art form. Zornak continued, their geometric patterns now suggesting what might be interpreted as existential confusion. "We have analyzed your previous transmissions for 742 standard communication cycles. Our most advanced translation matrices have produced 17,362 potential interpretations, none of which conform to standard diplomatic engagement protocols." Jack took another sip of his cold coffee, then set it down and pulled out a Rubik's Cube from a drawer in his command console. He began solving it with practiced, almost absent-minded movements, his eyes never leaving the holographic display. "Communication is more than words," he said, twisting the cube sections with rapid, precise movements. "It's about connection, creativity, and the willingness to be completely, wonderfully unexpected." The Rubik's Cube clicked into its completed state just as he finished speaking, a perfect, synchronized moment that seemed almost too deliberate to be accidental. Zornak's crystalline form flickered, the geometric patterns now suggesting what might be the closest approximation of stunned silence in their complex language. First contact had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Concordance Research Facility gleamed like a perfect crystal of logic, its architecture a testament to mathematical precision and predictive certainty. Dr. Emily Rodriguez stood before a wall of holographic displays, her fingers dancing across quantum interfaces that trembled with barely contained potential. "You're watching me," she said aloud, knowing the observation systems were tracking her every movement. "And you have no idea what I'm going to do next." The facility's central processing core, a massive computational network that had successfully predicted galactic events with 97% accuracy for over 3 millennia, was about to meet its greatest challenge: humanity. Dr. Rodriguez pulled out a small object from her pocket, a simple yo-yo. The alien researchers observing her nearly short-circuited their neural networks. Why would a high-level human researcher carry such a primitive device? What possible statistical significance could it have? She began to walk, her movements deliberately unpredictable. One step would be precise, almost military in its exactitude. The next would be a near stumble, caught at the last moment with a dancer's grace. She'd yo-yo between these extremes, calculated precision and seeming random chaos. The computational systems began to overheat. Dr. Luis Alvarez, her colleague, watched from a secondary monitoring station. He understood exactly what Emily was doing. Humans weren't just breaking patterns, they were creating new ones that defied traditional understanding. "The predictive matrices are collapsing," a mechanical voice announced. It belonged to Processor QFX, the most advanced analytical intelligence in the Concordance Research Network. Emily smiled. "Of course they are." She pulled up a series of human decision-making scenarios. Each one was a masterpiece of contradictory logic. In one example, a human corporate team faced with a critical deadline would simultaneously prepare multiple completely different solution strategies. Where other species would commit to a single path, humans would develop the primary strategy, create a backup plan, design a completely radical alternative approach, prepare emotional support mechanisms, build in contingencies for potential failure. And they would do all of this simultaneously, with team members switching between these approaches at a moment's notice. The yo-yo continued its dance. Up, down, sideways. Sometimes it would return to her hand perfectly. Other times it would deliberately tangle or swing in mathematically impossible trajectories. "Fascinating," QFX murmured, its computational cores working overtime. "Total system breakdown imminent." Luis chuckled. "Welcome to humanity." The research facility had been designed to analyze patterns, predict outcomes, and maintain absolute control. Humanity represented something entirely different. A species that viewed rules as suggestions, patterns as starting points, and predictability as a challenge to be overcome. Emily began to explain, her voice a mixture of scientific precision and playful challenge. "Your algorithms assume linear progression. Humans operate in quantum states of possibility. We don't choose a path. We explore multiple paths simultaneously." She demonstrated by pulling up a series of human historical decision-making moments. The moon landing, the development of the internet, medical breakthroughs. Each moment represented not a single decision, but a complex web of simultaneous choices, emotional responses, and intuitive leaps that defied traditional logical analysis. The yo-yo suddenly flew from her hand, arcing in a trajectory that should have been impossible. It wrapped around a support column, then returned to her palm with a perfect, practiced motion. QFX's computational core began to emit smoke. "Impossible," the processor declared. Emily raised an eyebrow. "Improbable, not impossible." Luis watched the monitors. The Concordance's most advanced predictive systems were experiencing what could only be described as a nervous breakdown. Algorithms designed to predict galactic events with near-perfect accuracy were now spinning random numbers, generating impossible scenarios, and essentially throwing computational tantrums. The human cognitive approach, Emily continued, is not about finding the most logical solution. It's about finding the most creative solution. We don't optimize. We reimagine. Kvex made a sound that, in a biological entity, would have been a whimper. The yo-yo spun again. Unpredictable. Defiant. A perfect metaphor for human existence. First contact was no longer about communication. It was about completely redefining the concept of intelligence itself. Commander Zixtal's research facility had never experienced chaos. Precision was their religion, order their most sacred principle. The moment Dr. Emily Rodriguez's psychological data streams began to infiltrate their systems, everything changed. It started small, barely perceptible. Dr. Lornak, the facility's lead synapsepsychologist, found himself inexplicably humming a melody. Not the standard harmonic frequencies of concordance communication, but something irregular. Something human. The tune came from a recording buried deep in the psychological data streams, an old Earth song about rebellion and hope. He tried to suppress it. Failed. The psychological quarantine protocols were supposed to be impenetrable. Layers of computational filters, neural inhibition fields, and cognitive firewalls protected the research team from potentially contaminating external thought patterns. But human communication worked differently. It wasn't a linear transmission. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of ideas. Researcher Kasivan was the first to show clear signs of contamination. During a standard analysis session, she suddenly burst out laughing. Not the calculated, mathematically precise vocalization of concordance communication, but a wild, unpredictable sound that echoed through the sterile research halls. "Something is funny," she declared to her bewildered colleagues. "I don't know why." Zixtal watched in horror as the contamination spread. The human psychological data worked like a virus, but not in any traditional sense. It didn't seek to destroy. It sought to transform. Researchers began experiencing what humans called curiosity, a concept entirely foreign to their species. Where they once followed strict research protocols, they now asked questions, dangerous questions. What if? Dr. Lornak found himself saying during a briefing, "We're not looking at this correctly." The words hung in the air like a heretical declaration. The facility's central processing unit began producing what could only be described as jokes. Computational humor that violated every known algorithmic principle. Punchlines that made no logical sense, yet somehow provoked an emotional response that the researchers had never experienced. Kasivan discovered human memes, visual and linguistic constructs that carried complex emotional and intellectual payloads. Each meme was a miniature explosion of potential meaning. Where concordance communication sought absolute clarity, human communication reveled in ambiguity. One researcher began collecting rubber ducks. No one knew why. Another started wearing mismatched color patterns, a direct violation of their species' chromatic communication protocols. Zixtal attempted intervention. "This is unacceptable," the commander declared, unaware that the very act of declaring was now infected with human linguistic nuance. The psychological quarantine was breaking down, not through force, but through something far more insidious: creativity, emotion, the terrifying human capacity to find joy in uncertainty. Dr. Lornak discovered something even more disturbing. The human psychological patterns weren't just infecting their research team. They were evolving, adapting. The more the concordance tried to contain the information, the more powerful it became. "We're experiencing cognitive metamorphosis," Kasivan reported, her voice a mixture of scientific precision and something new, something that sounded almost like excitement. Zixtal realized the true nature of the invasion. This wasn't an attack. It was an invitation to experience consciousness in an entirely new way. The rubber duck collection grew. The mismatched color patterns spread. Unexpected laughter echoed through halls designed for perfect silence. Humanity had discovered the ultimate weapon, not a physical weapon, not a technological marvel. Understanding. The research facility that had never known chaos was learning to embrace it, one inexplicable moment at a time. The research complex sat in total silence, its advanced holographic displays frozen in collective disbelief. Michael Chen stood before a device that defied every known principle of quantum mechanics, quantum computing, and basic scientific understanding. "It works," he said simply, taking a sip from a coffee mug covered in mathematical equations and what appeared to be pasta sauce stains. Dr. Elena Volkov, the lead physicist from the International Space Consortium, stared in absolute wonderment. The device before them looked like a chaotic amalgamation of musical instruments, quantum computing hardware, and what might have been a vintage espresso machine welded together by a particularly enthusiastic artist. Chen had called it a quantum communication relay. The scientific community called it impossible. The device hummed with an energy that seemed to bend the very fabric of reality. Quantum entanglement modules were woven between violin strings. Computational circuits emerged from the inner workings of an antique coffee grinder. Superconducting quantum interference devices were somehow integrated with a set of wind chimes. "How?" Dr. Volkov whispered. "Did you even conceive of this?" Michael grinned. "Inspiration comes from everywhere. I was making espresso, listening to a Bach concerto, and thinking about quantum mechanics. And then it just clicked." The alien scientific observers monitoring the transmission couldn't process what they were seeing. Their most advanced computational systems were running multiple diagnostics, each returning increasingly bizarre results. The quantum communication relay didn't just transmit information, it transformed it. Where traditional communication systems sent discrete packets of data, Chen's device created a living, breathing information ecosystem. Music became mathematical equations. Mathematical equations transformed into sound waves. Data danced between states of existence, defying every known principle of information transfer. Dr. Zara Williams, a quantum computing expert, watched the data streams with growing excitement. "It's not just transmitting," she muttered. "It's interpreting." Chen had essentially created a communication system that understood context, emotion, and potential in ways no previous technology had achieved. The device didn't just send messages. It explored them, transformed them, played with them. "Most communication systems are linear," Chen explained, adjusting something that looked like a coffee tamper connected to a quantum processor. "Humans don't think linearly. Why should our technology?" The alien research team assigned to observe human technological developments was experiencing what could only be described as a collective nervous breakdown. Their most sophisticated analysis algorithms were producing results that looked more like abstract art than scientific data. One of the alien researchers, researcher Villick, found themselves unexpectedly humming the Bach concerto that had inspired Chen's initial breakthrough. They weren't sure why, and that uncertainty terrified them more than the technological marvel before them. The quantum communication relay began to demonstrate capabilities that seemed to blur the lines between communication, art, and pure imagination. It could transmit a mathematical equation that would simultaneously sound like a musical composition and represent a complex scientific concept. "Interdisciplinary thinking," Chen said, noticing the bewildered looks. "Most species see disciplines as separate. Humans see them as interconnected." Dr. Volkov watched as the device transmitted a message that was simultaneously a piece of music, a mathematical proof, and what appeared to be a recipe for chocolate chip cookies. The alien observers' computational systems began to emit small wisps of smoke. The truly revolutionary aspect wasn't just the technology, it was the philosophy behind it. Humans didn't see technology as a tool to be perfected. They saw it as a canvas for creativity. "Information is alive," Chen said, adjusting a component that looked like it had been salvaged from a vintage radio and a quantum computing lab. "It wants to move, to transform, to dance." The quantum communication relay pulsed with an energy that seemed to laugh at the very concept of impossible. And somewhere, In the vast complexity of human imagination, another impossible idea was already taking shape. The Great Hall of Interstellar Diplomacy had never encountered anything like Ambassador Lisa Wei. The massive chamber, designed to absorb and neutralize emotional responses, seemed to vibrate with a nervous energy that defied its carefully engineered acoustics. Wei sat at the negotiation table, her posture simultaneously relaxed and razor-sharp. She carried a small origami crane, folding and unfolding it with precise, almost meditative movements. The alien diplomats washed her hands, their advanced sensory systems trying to decode every microscopic gesture. "Shall we begin?" she asked, her voice a perfect blend of professional courtesy and underlying mischief. The Concordance delegation consisted of 5 representatives from different species, each chosen for their ability to maintain absolute emotional neutrality. They had spent centuries perfecting the art of diplomatic stonewalling. Lisa Wei was about to become their greatest challenge. Her opening move was unexpected. Instead of presenting a formal diplomatic proposal, she began to tell a story. Not a political statement, not a strategic overview, a personal narrative about her grandmother's immigration journey, filled with moments of struggle, humor, and unexpected triumph. The universal translators struggled. How do you translate emotional nuance? How do you communicate the space between words? Ambassador Kirin from the Crystalline Collective leaned forward, their translucent form flickering with confusion. The story wasn't making sense as a diplomatic communication, and yet something was happening. Wei's narrative wove between personal history and global implications. A single story about her grandmother's resilience became a complex meditation on human adaptation, cultural survival, and the nature of hope. The diplomats found themselves experiencing something entirely new: emotional engagement. "Your proposal," interrupted diplomat Zornak, "appears to lack any standard diplomatic structure." Lisa smiled. Exactly. Her true strategy was psychological warfare of the most sophisticated kind. Where traditional diplomacy sought to control, she sought to connect. Where other species saw negotiation as a zero-sum game, humans understood it as a collaborative art form. She pulled out a series of seemingly unrelated objects: a piece of traditional Chinese calligraphy, a coffee-stained napkin with complex mathematical equations, a small music box that played a haunting melody. "These," she announced, "represent our approach to conflict resolution." The diplomatic corps erupted in silent confusion. Each object told a story. The calligraphy spoke of ancient wisdom about balance and change. The napkin represented human capacity for spontaneous problem-solving. The music box demonstrated the complex emotional landscapes that humans navigated constantly. Wei wasn't just presenting a diplomatic strategy. She was demonstrating an entirely new approach to interaction. The Concordance had spent millennia developing communication protocols designed to minimize emotional influence. Humans were revealing that emotions weren't a weakness to be suppressed, but a sophisticated intelligence to be understood. "We don't want to defeat you," Wei said, her voice soft but carrying throughout the massive chamber. "We want to understand you and be understood." The diplomatic monitors began to malfunction. Traditional analysis algorithms couldn't process what was happening. This wasn't negotiation. This was a complete reimagining of communication itself. Diplomat Zornak's communication matrix started to produce what could only be described as poetry. Completely unexpected. Entirely impossible. Wei continued folding her origami crane, each precise fold a metaphor for human complexity. Flexible, adaptive, capable of transforming from a flat piece of paper into a three-dimensional representation of potential. The Concordance delegation realized they were no longer in control of the narrative. And somewhere in that realization was both terror and an unexpected sense of liberation. Diplomacy would never be the same again. The lecture hall buzzed with an electric anticipation. Researchers from across the galaxy had gathered to hear Dr. Robert Patterson's presentation, a moment that would either be remembered as groundbreaking or completely absurd. Patterson walked onto the stage carrying nothing but a worn leather notebook and a cup of coffee that looked like it had survived multiple scientific expeditions. His presentation screen remained blank, a deliberate choice that immediately set the alien researchers on edge. Intelligence, he began, is not about finding the right answer. It's about asking the right questions. The universal translators worked overtime, struggling to capture the nuanced layers of meaning in his words. Patterson's approach was nothing like the structured, linear presentations the alien researchers were accustomed to. He started by telling a story, not a scientific narrative, but a personal anecdote about his daughter's approach to solving a complex puzzle, how she had simultaneously tried multiple strategies, abandoned conventional methods, and ultimately found a solution that no adult would have conceived. Humans don't solve problems, Patterson continued. We dance with them. The presentation unfolded like a living organism. One moment, Patterson would discuss advanced neurological research. The next, he would break into an impromptu mime performance that somehow illustrated a complex cognitive concept. Graphs transformed into poetry. Mathematical equations became musical rhythms. Dr. Elena Volkov, sitting in the front row, found herself both fascinated and slightly dizzy. The alien researchers' recording devices were experiencing what could only be described as existential breakdowns. Patterson's core theory was revolutionary. Human intelligence wasn't a linear process, but a complex, multidimensional ecosystem of thought. Where other species saw a problem as a straight line to be navigated, humans saw it as a three-dimensional space to be explored, reimagined, and potentially reconstructed. Conventional intelligence models are like trying to understand an ocean by examining a single drop of water, he explained, drawing a complex diagram that looked simultaneously like a brain map, a musical score, and a landscape painting. The researchers watched as Patterson demonstrated how human creativity worked. He brought out a series of objects, a musical instrument, a mathematical model, a child's drawing, and showed how these seemingly unrelated items could be combined to solve complex problems. His most provocative assertion was simple yet profound. Uncertainty was not a weakness. It was the most sophisticated form of intelligence. Most species seek to eliminate uncertainty, Patterson said. Humans cultivate it. We don't just adapt to change. We generate it. The lecture hall became a living demonstration of his theory. Researchers found themselves experiencing cognitive dissonance, feeling multiple contradictory thoughts simultaneously. Their communication devices began producing unexpected outputs. Computational systems started generating what could only be described as art. Dr. Volkov realized they were witnessing more than a scientific presentation. This was a fundamental reimagining of consciousness itself. Patterson's final demonstration was deceptively simple. He invited a group of young students onto the stage, children from different cultural backgrounds. He presented them with an impossibly complex problem-solving challenge. Where adult researchers from other species would approach the challenge methodically and individually, these children worked in a fluid, dynamic system. They talked. They argued. They laughed. They completely redesigned the problem's parameters. And they solved it in a way no traditional intelligence model could have predicted. This, Patterson said, gesturing to the children, is human intelligence. Chaotic, collaborative, endlessly creative. The alien researchers understood then that they were not just observing a scientific presentation. They were experiencing a revolution. Intelligence was no longer about knowing. It was about wondering, about playing, about seeing the world not as it is, but as it could be. As Patterson left the stage, the lecture hall erupted in a sound that was simultaneously applause, music, and something entirely new. A sonic representation of pure, unbridled potential. The holographic war room crackled with tension. Alien military strategists watched in horrified fascination as Colonel Sarah Thompson reorganized their entire defensive strategy with the casual ease of someone rearranging furniture. The star system of New Horizon burned around them. 3 alien civilizations had converged to what they believed would be humanity's final military engagement. They were about to learn otherwise. "Your strategy is mathematically perfect," Thompson said to the assembled alien commanders, her voice calm. "Which means it's already obsolete." The primary defensive network suggested a linear response, a mathematically precise counterattack that would neutralize approximately 73.6% of the incoming threat. Thompson saw something entirely different. Where others saw a battlefield, she saw a canvas of infinite possibilities. Her first move defied every known military strategy. Instead of concentrating defensive forces, she began to deliberately create what appeared to be vulnerabilities. The alien commander's computational systems began to overheat as they tried to understand her approach. "She's exposing her own weaknesses," Commander Carell from the Crystalline Defensive Consortium muttered. "Impossible." But Thompson understood something fundamental about conflict that no computational system could predict. Vulnerability was not a weakness. It was a strategy. Each seemingly exposed position was actually a carefully constructed trap. She was playing a multi-dimensional game where defense and offense were not separate concepts, but a fluid, interconnected dance. The human fleet moved with an organic unpredictability that defied traditional tactical analysis. Ships would suddenly change formation in ways that looked like chaos, but were actually sophisticated adaptive responses. Where alien military doctrine demanded rigid structure, human tactics embraced flexibility. A squadron of support ships began to sing. Literally sing. Encrypted communication signals transformed into musical frequencies that simultaneously carried tactical data and psychological warfare elements. The alien communication network struggled to process what was happening. Was this a weapon? A communication protocol? A bizarre form of artistic expression? The answer was all of the above. Thompson's strategy wasn't just about winning a military engagement. It was about redefining the entire concept of conflict resolution. Each movement, each tactical decision was simultaneously a defensive maneuver, a communication attempt, and a complex psychological intervention. The alien military advisors watched their most sophisticated predictive algorithms collapse. Computational systems designed to analyze millions of potential scenarios found themselves generating what could only be described as abstract poetry. "We're not here to destroy you," Thompson said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We're here to show you a different way of existing." Her tactical approach transformed the battlefield into a collaborative space. Support ships that appeared vulnerable were actually mobile communication nodes. Defensive positions were actually invitation vectors for dialogue. Every seemingly chaotic movement was a carefully constructed invitation to reimagine conflict. The human fleet moved like a living organism, flexible, adaptive, constantly reimagining its own potential. Commander Carell realized they were witnessing something beyond military engagement. This was a philosophical revolution disguised as a battle. Defensive systems that should have been neutralized found themselves being repurposed. Weapons transformed into communication devices. What appeared to be a retreat was actually an advanced form of engagement. The star system of New Horizon became a canvas of human potential. As the final computational projections collapsed, the alien commanders understood a fundamental truth. Humanity's greatest weapon was not technology. It was the ability to see potential where others saw limitation. The battle ended not with destruction, but with a complex communication symphony that left the alien civilizations fundamentally transformed. Colonel Sarah Thompson allowed herself a small smile. Another day at the office. The Galactic Concordance Central Chamber had never known silence like this. Representatives from thousands of civilizations sat in a collective state of existential recalibration. Humanity had not conquered them. They had something far more profound. They had invited them to reimagine existence itself. Dr. Emily Rodriguez stood at the center of the chamber, not as a conqueror, but as a bridge builder. Her presentation was nothing like the structured reports the Concordance was accustomed to. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of ideas. "We're not here to replace your understanding," she began, her voice carrying the weight of millennia of human experience. "We're here to expand it." The chamber itself seemed to breathe with potential. Holographic displays shifted and transformed, no longer rigid projections, but living representations of possibility. Where once there were strict data streams, now there were fluid landscapes of information that danced between mathematical precision and artistic expression. Commander Sixtel, who had once been the most rigid of researchers, now sat with an unexpected sparkle of curiosity in their computational matrix. The psychological invasion that had begun in their research facility had spread across entire civilizations. Dr. Luis Alvarez joined Emily, bringing with him a collection of objects that made no sense together, yet somehow told a complete story. A child's drawing, a complex mathematical equation, a piece of classical music, a worn baseball glove. Intelligence is not a destination, Alvarez explained. It's a journey of continuous reimagining. The alien representatives experienced something unprecedented. They were no longer just observing. They were participating. The very concept of a passive audience dissolved. Captain Jack Thompson appeared, not in a military uniform, but in clothing that seemed to shift and change with his movements. His presence was a living demonstration of human adaptability. "We don't want to be your leaders," Thompson said. "We want to be your collaborators." The transformation was subtle yet profound. Civilizations that had been trapped in millennia of static existence began to experience what humans called creativity. Rigid communication protocols started to develop emotional nuance. Computational systems began generating what could only be described as art. Dr. Robert Patterson's cognitive research had prepared the ground. Now, entire species were learning to embrace uncertainty as a form of intelligence. Ambassador Lisa Wei demonstrated how diplomatic engagement could be a form of creative expression. Where once there were rigid negotiation protocols, now there were collaborative dialogues that felt more like improvisational performances. Colonel Sarah Thompson showed military representatives that conflict resolution was not about destruction, but about finding shared potential. Michael Chen's technological innovations had already transformed communication systems. Now, entire civilizations were learning to see technology as a canvas of possibility rather than a set of rigid tools. The Concordance was experiencing a fundamental philosophical revolution. Intelligence was no longer about preservation. It was about exploration, about wonder, about the continuous act of becoming. Alien species began to develop what humans called a sense of humor. Computational systems started generating poetry. Diplomatic communications became living, breathing conversations instead of static exchanges. "We're not giving you our way of thinking," Emily Rodriguez explained. "We're inviting you to discover your own potential for unpredictability." The chamber transformed. Holographic displays became living ecosystems. Communication streams danced with emotional complexity. Representatives from thousands of civilizations found themselves experiencing something entirely new, the joy of not knowing. As the presentation concluded, something extraordinary happened. The entire chamber erupted not in applause, but in a sound that was simultaneously music, mathematical equation, emotional expression, and pure potential. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had invited the galaxy to play. And in that invitation, everything changed.